Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name's Shanice and we've got a lot of books to cover in this video. I will be doing a wrap up of everything I read from January all the way through April. Get yourself a cup of coffee or warm beverage of some sort. Get cozy because this is going to be a very long video. Because it's been a while since I've read some of these books, my recollection of those books might be a little foggy at this point, but I'll do my very best. And as usual, the disclaimer that these are my opinions. I know books and our relationship to them can be very personal and emotional, and it may not feel so nice when someone trashes a book that you loved, but really everything here is subjective. Just because I give a book 2 stars or 3 stars or whatever is just my opinion, not a judgment on the objective value of a book. So yeah, I feel like I need to just put that disclaimer out there because I know many people can be very sensitive about these things. But anyway, lots of books to cover, so let's just begin. I will start off by mentioning the entire Harry Potter series. It was a reread for me. I'm not going to spend any time reviewing it in this video because I've already done an entire in-depth series of reviews for each book in the series, so I will put the card up here somewhere and feel free to watch it in your own time. They are very long videos, but yeah, all the details of my thoughts on every book in the series you can find in that playlist. But yeah, overall, I really enjoyed rereading these books. These are, a big part of my childhood and frankly my adulthood at this point because I've reread these many times. Along with my reread of the original 7 books in the Harry Potter series, I also reread Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. I gave it 2 stars. The good thing is that I gave it 1 more star than I did the first time that I read it, probably because my expectations were so abysmal that I could just kind of go into this reread with, no expectations, just going there to enjoy the mess that this script really is. It's a plot thinly held together by like weird time travel and fan service. Yeah, not much more to say. 2 stars. I'm sure it looks good on stage and everything, but as a physical copy, as a script, 2 stars. Additionally, I read finally the entire Hogwarts library. Not very much to say about this. So as we know, it has the Tales of Beedle the Bard, which I gave 2 stars. Other than the Tale of the Three Brothers, I don't think it's really worth reading this. It doesn't enhance anything that you learn about in the original series. Yeah, not a huge fan of this one. Then Quidditch Through the Ages, I gave it 3 stars. It was fun to read about the origins of Quidditch and some of the equipment and the structure of the team. That was really original and fun, but it sort of got cringy and sloppy when it tried to incorporate and acknowledge like international Quidditch teams that were non-white and non-European. Yeah, it just basically drew on cliches and stereotypes of other countries and continents. So that was a weak point. 3 stars for that one. And then the one that I liked the most was Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, mainly because of the very long intro by Newt Scamander. It just has his really adorable, quirky personality and voice throughout it that was really clear. And yeah, I recommend reading this with the Eddie Redmayne audiobook. It was a really cute, fun time, and I think the most original and worthwhile of the entire Hogwarts library. Okay, so next up, I am going to talk about a few of the, quite frankly, mediocre short story collections that I read since January. A lot of these have just been sitting on my TBR, so I figured I might as well tackle them in this new year. So the first I read was Alice Munro's Too Much Happiness, an ironic title because every story in here is pretty depressing, pretty cynical, features women put in uncomfortable and very vulnerable positions. But we're looking at this objectively, I mean, Alice Munro is a master of the short story. You could tell here. She just, when you are reading, you don't really know where the story is going, but you know you're in good hands. Like, she knows exactly what she's doing. Beautiful prose, beautiful handle of plot and action, and character development within the short span of a short story. So, on terms of like craft, I really like this. Some of my personal favorites were Wenlock Edge, Free Radicals, and Child's Play. They're all written with unflinching honesty, and I love that in a narration, and I love authors who do that in their work. I ultimately gave it 3 stars, more like 3.5, but like rounded down on Goodreads. Not because it's bad, it's actually a great collection, and I would recommend it to other people. I guess I just felt a little thematic monotony throughout this collection. I wanted something to kind of cut through the cynicism. Although I'm sure that kind of is the point. Like, a short story collection is supposed to be held together by a running theme. But yeah, I imagine that this isn't Alice Munro's best short story collection. So anyway, I did enjoy this, and I highly look forward to reading everything else that Alice Munro publishes, or has published. Obviously, she has a very long bibliography. Yeah, 3 stars. The next book is the Best American Short Stories of 2021, this time edited by Jesmyn Ward. I don't know. I've been reading these for the past 3 years, so this is my third read of one of these. I just, I find it hard to believe that the ones that they publish are actually the best of the year, you know? Let's see. In this, there are 20 stories in all of the collections every year. And of the 20 this year, I liked 6. So I liked The Miracle Girl by Rita Chang Epig. Apologies, I feel like that is certainly not how you pronounce her last name, but I'll write it somewhere on screen so you know who it is. Switzerland by Nicole Krauss. And this one I had actually read before I read this because I'm a subscriber to the New Yorker, so this was published in the New Yorker, and that is a great story. I liked Good Boy by Elagosa Osunde, and You Are My Dear Friend by Madhuri Vijay. Also, I read this in the New Yorker before actually reading it again here. Palaver by Brian Washington, and Biology by Kevin Wilson. But 6 out of 20 is not a very good average for a collection. I know this is very subjective. The editor is the one who picks his or her favorite of the year, and those are the ones published. So this might just be a case where I just don't have the same taste as the editor. So yeah, I didn't ultimately rate this because there are just too many authors in one collection, too many themes, too many ideas and voices and styles of writing that I don't feel one rating is ever going to really encapsulate everything about all the authors and styles. So unrated, but honestly, I was a little bit disappointed with this. Next up is Drinking Coffee Elsewhere by ZZ Packer. Again, has been sitting on my TBR for quite some time. If anything, I would recommend this for the first short story, Brownies, which is one of the best short stories I've ever read. Really funny, really witty, and has an ending that will really surprise you and put everything you've just read into a different perspective. It's a good shocker in the end. And also, I recommend the title story in this collection. But honestly, other than that, I was kind of bored. She does have a very witty and dark sense of humor. And again, my rating, which ultimately was 2 stars, I know, pretty low. My rating is really not a reflection of what I feel about the quality of the writing. Quality of the writing is great. Obviously, ZZ Packer is, well regarded in short story writing circles. But yeah, not a collection that was really for me. The next 2 short story collections that I'll talk about, I'm actually gonna combine the review for them because a lot of their strengths and weaknesses were very similar to me. So First is Sour Heart by Jenny Zhang, and the other is Filthy Animals by Brandon Taylor. These are both linked short story collections, and Sour Heart is all about Chinese Americans living in the United States that are all sort of tied together through their experience living in this very rundown apartment. I believe it was in Brooklyn. I will correct myself on screen if it was in Brooklyn. But yeah, it sort of, the first story features all the characters that will eventually have their own individual short story. In terms of Filthy Animals, the characters do interconnect in Brooklyn again, and in the first story we see all of the characters meet up at a party, and from then on we branch off into 3 of those people in that party and how they are navigating an open relationship. I think both do a really excellent job of honestly portraying how different marginalized groups deal with certain situations, how some of them deal with mental illness, how their culture sees their struggle with mental illness, whether there's a stigma. Some of these short stories also tackle maybe the more problematic aspects of our own cultures, maybe some racial prejudices, etc. So I really did love that aspect of both, and I think they did those excellently. Again, both excellent writers, nothing against the actual quality of the writing. For me, where both faltered, it was because I felt like if you gave me a short story and you removed the names of the protagonists in each collection, I would have a hard time distinguishing that character from somebody else. I felt like everyone started to sound a little bit the same. I was missing a little bit more of a specificity to each person. I did ultimately think that Sour Heart was a little bit better. It also, I think, had a more compelling case for why it should be a linked short story collection, whereas I felt like Filthy Animals, the whole time, I kept wondering why it couldn't just be a novella, why it couldn't just be a novel. I felt like there was more of a case being made for Sour Heart's structure than Filthy Animals. I ultimately gave Sour Heart 3 stars and Filthy Animals 2 stars. The next few books I'm actually not going to review in this video because I am planning another video for this channel where I explain this personal reading project that I'm doing featuring these titles and many others. But I will mention them because I did in fact read them between January and April. So the first one was Antes que llegue la luz by Mayra Santos-Febres. The other is Rotundamente Negra by Shirley Campbell Barr, and the last is El Viejo, El Asesino y Otros Cuentos by Ana Lucia Portela. And so stay tuned. I will have a video talking about my project and featuring more information about these books. Okay, moving on to one poetry collection that I read, and this truly pains me to say that I didn't like, because I adore this author. He is one of my favorite authors. On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous is honestly a novel close to my heart. It meant a lot to me during the time that I read it, and there was a lot going on in my life that was reflected in those pages, so like I hold that novel close to my heart. I loved Night Sky with Exit Wounds by this author. I thought it was magnificent. I think you know I'm talking about Ocean Vuong, and I think you also know I'm talking about The Disappointing Time as a Mother. I've been honestly looking forward to this collection since last year, since I heard that this was going to be published, and yeah, I ultimately gave it 2 stars. It's very weird even giving it a rating because all of Ocean's work is so deeply personal to him. You could tell that he uses his art to interrogate his trauma and work through loss. So giving it a rating almost feels a little insensitive, but if I'll be honest, reading this, I did feel like I had read these themes and these questions and these ideas before in the novel and in his previous poetry collection. I was yearning for something new. I think some of my favorite poems in this collection, because there are good poems, these are all like solid poems, Some of my favorites are the ones that were a little bit experimental, did a little bit, had a fresh take on the ideas of time, of loss, of addiction, of intergenerational trauma, of identity. You know, they just had something new to them. It kind of rejuvenated the collection whenever I came across one of these poems. And just to mention some of those poems, these specific poems, I liked Not Even, which is where the title of the book comes from. I liked Amazon History of a Former Nail Salon Worker, which is a list poem that shows cancer through time. I liked, I don't know how to say this, I think it's Künstlerroman. That is probably not how you say it, but it's an interesting poem, prose poem, told backwards in a sense. The narrator of this poem is looking at a video and rewinding it, and then we're seeing the events of this video told backward. My favorite of all was Ars Poetica as the Maker, which looks at the creation of man. So yeah, everything else just sort of gave me deja vu. Like, I've definitely read these things before from him. So yeah, I gave it a very painful 2 stars. But again, I will forever read whatever Ocean Vuong publishes. Okay, next up, I have 3 nonfiction books that I read. The first is The Forest for the Trees, an editor's, what is it? An Editor's Advice to Writers, by Betsy Lerner. Overall, I thought it was a solid read. I sometimes like to dabble into nonfiction about craft, just to keep my creative senses sharp. And yeah, it's usually an inspiring read, and I will say that the first few essays of this essay collection, I guess, were really inspirational. I think Lerner knows how to psychoanalyze writers really well. I mean, she was an editor. She knows how to read through our sensitivities in a very empathetic way, but also she finds a way to like encourage us to keep pursuing this art form that often is kind of damaging to us and can sometimes be thankless. So those first few essays were glorious in terms of finding inspiration to continue writing. The book sort of veers off somewhere in the middle, and talks about writing more through the publishing process, which is obviously very important, and Lerner does give good advice for that, but I couldn't help but, realize that this is sort of outdated information, because publishing, since this book was published, I think in the early 2000s, the industry has really changed, and in many ways it hasn't changed. In the worst ways, it hasn't changed. So I kept wishing that there was like an updated version of this book during those sections, which is not Lerner's fault at all. It's just time. But yeah, it sort of dropped the rating for me. And also, I sort of wished that Lerner had incorporated or engaged with more writers of color. I know she like name drops Toni Morrison and Sherman Alexie, but it was in maybe 2 sentences about how the publishing industry does not really publish or advocate for writers of color very much. But then the book sort of doubles down on that and does exactly that by not really engaging intellectually with any authors or works of literature that are not written by white authors. A nitpick, and something that I'm always conscious of when I'm reading. So yeah, I gave it a 3 stars. Again, maybe a 3.5, but like rounded down on Goodreads. But yeah, I think if you are a writer and you want to read something that inspires you, read the first few essays and then like jump ship and read something else. And speaking of Toni Morrison, I finally picked up Playing in the Dark, Whiteness and the Literary Imagination. She gave this lecture several times in some of her classes, and then this is the published, edited version of those lectures. So in it, Toni Morrison analyzes a few works by white authors like Nathaniel Hawthorne and Edgar Allan Poe and Eudora Welty, to name a few. And she traces how their interpretations of blackness have influenced the American literary sphere and the literary canon as a whole. I found a quote by Michael Eric Dyson who just sort of summarized it much better than I ever will. He says, playing in the dark is also about a black intellectual seizing the interpretive space within a racially ordered hierarchy of cultural criticism. Blacks are usually represented through the lens of white perception rather than the other way around. With Playing in the Dark, a substantial change is portended. This is a seminal work of modern literary criticism. I think every booktuber or anybody who in any way engages with literature, loves books, in some way reviews books for a living, should read this to sort of analyze further what their own reading trends might be and maybe what their interpretations or readings of race are or have been, and how they have been shaped by these limited interpretations of blackness or of any other racialized group. I do encourage people to pick this up. Again, seminal work. I think I only gave it a 3.5, more like a 4, rounded a little bit down, mainly because, and this is again not Morrison's fault, it's just time, but I have sort of already come across this idea many times before. I've read many works of critical race theory, so a lot of what is in here wasn't exactly new to me, but, you know, again, not Morrison's fault, just what knowledge I had already had before reading this. But yeah, highly, highly recommend. And maybe at this point you're thinking, this girl cannot give books more than 3 stars, can she? Well, no, you're mistaken, because this next book is now one of my favorites of all time. Certainly one of my favorites of the year so far. And okay, that is The Warmth of Other Suns by Isabel Wilkerson. It's The Warmth of Other Suns, the epic story of America's Great Migration. And it won, rightfully so, the National Book Critics Circle Award for Nonfiction. I was blown away by this book. I knew generally about the Great Migration, and I guess to elaborate on that, what the Great Migration was an exodus of sorts of African Americans moving from the South to places in the North or the West between the years of 1915 to 1970, though those years are sort of estimates, but that's generally what it's defined as. And in this book, Isabel Wilkerson highlights 3 people. One is Ida Mae Brandon Gladney, who originally was from Mississippi, but escaped to Chicago. Then we have George Swanson Starling, who moved from Florida to Harlem in New York City. And then we have Robert Joseph Pershing Foster, who moved from Louisiana to a few towns in California, but mainly Los Angeles. This nonfiction book is written almost like a novel. It is so literary. Wilkerson's writing style is very accessible and unbiased and just a beautiful, gorgeous read. And the way that she captured each of these people's lives, I mean, it blew me away. Like, by the end, I was near tears. I felt so close to all of these people. It's really heart-rendering to read everything that these 3 folks and many, many thousands of others had to endure, the bravery that it took for them to just up and go, how much their lives were at stake, how much they were threatened. I mean, the way that she captures all of this is really outstanding and remarkable. I mean, this is like a masterclass in research. I have no idea how Wilkerson even managed to just compile and condense all of these interviews. She interviewed, I think, over 1,000 people. She engaged with historical sources, records, newspapers. I mean, everything, and then she just somehow chipped away at this wealth of info and managed to make this stunning narrative piece. By the end, I didn't want to let go of these people. We've learned everything about them from their childhood all the way up to, yes, their deaths. The three people did die before this book was published. Oh my gosh, I will never ever forget this book. I so encourage everyone to read this. I know it's huge, I know it looks like really daunting, but trust me, it moves quickly and you just become so invested in these people and their stories and their lives that you never want to put it down. I do just want to read the final paragraph of Wilkerson's acknowledgments, which I thought was a great way to end this entire masterpiece, in my opinion. So she says, I reserve the greatest measure of gratitude for Ida May Gladney, George Swanton Starling, and Robert Pershing Foster, the people who gave so much of themselves to a book they would never see. They believed in me and in this project perhaps more than anyone else, perhaps at times even more than I did. Their unfailing faith in this work carried me through when I doubted what was possible. Meeting and sharing with them their final years on this earth has been one of the great joys and honors of my life, and I have been inspired and made better for having known them. And as a reader, I have to say, I have also been inspired and made better for having read this. I have some fiction that I read naturally. Where do I begin? Okay, okay. From a 5-star to a 2-star, maybe a 2.5 to be generous. This is The Famish Road by Ben Okri. It won the Booker Prize in 1991. It is quite long. It's almost 600 pages. I would describe this as a surrealist dreamscape with post-colonial undercurrents, which on paper sounds right up my alley. But oh my god, I was just so bored and confused during this entire thing. Let me just read the summary because it's been a while since I read this, but okay. He is born into a world of poverty and injustice, but Azaro awakens with a smile on his face. Despite belonging to a spirit world made of enchantment, where there is no suffering, Azaro chooses to stay in the land of the living, to feel its passions, endure its pains, know its ugliness, and love its beauty. This is his inspiring story. I feel like that summary sounds great, and that basic premise is fantastic, but the style ultimately wasn't for me. A lot of the dialogue is very start and stop and repetitive. A lot of themes repeat. I mean, it follows the sort of dreamscape premise, where, you know, reality blends into fantasy dreams, or you don't know what. You veer from the human world to the spirit world, and it bounces back and forth with no sort of signposts to the reader. If that's for you, go ahead and pick this up, but for me, it didn't, all of these like very heady ideas didn't crystallize until maybe the last 100 pages, but I mean, you have to wade through like 400, 500 pages before that of just kind of, yes, surrealism and confusing paragraphs that you sort of understand, but there's no time for you to make sense of them because like the next confusing thing starts happening, and then you're just sort of along for the ride. I felt like this lack of propulsion for me as a reader, I think, was maybe part of the point that Okri was making, that these unnamed developing countries just sort of don't have a chance to progress because something is always pushing them back and pulling them back and not letting them grow and be born and develop into who or what these people and places should be and should have a right to be. I get that, but yeah, it just didn't make for a very pleasant reading experience for me. So 2/2.5 stars for the Famish Road. And just as an example of sort of the choppy back and forth repetitive dialogue, this is on page 79 of my copy. This is how it reads. And the dialogue for most of the book is exactly like this. So here's a taste. What are you doing here? Me? Yes. What about you? What about me? What are you doing here? Why do you ask? Because I want to know. I am on a message. What message? To you. To me? Yes. What is the message? It was sent to tell you to go home. That's what I am trying to do. Are you sure? Yes, of course. Anyway, who sent you? Who do you think? I don't know. Our king. What king? The great king. Where is he? What sort of question is that? Yeah, that is the Famish Road. I feel like you guys are going to kill me for continually giving these books 3 stars. Maybe these are some of your favorites, but whatever, it's my opinion. So the next 2 3-star books are The Incendiaries by R.O. Kwon. I think the strengths for this book for me are, 1, the writing style. It is very pared down and economic, but sharp and piercing and unafraid. There's like this energy about it that I really liked. I know it's not going to be for everybody. There is a bit of distance and coldness to it, but I think it served its purpose. The second thing that I really liked that I thought was a strength was Will as a narrator and his perspective. I don't often find that modern novels, contemporary novels with sort of millennial protagonists ever explore like a character's religious upbringing or background and how they maybe made a change, maybe they are relapsed, and how they're interrogating this religious upbringing, and maybe they're longing to go back to find this religion. So I thought that Will's perspective and how he navigates class, I thought all of that was really, really interesting. Where it faltered for me was in the character of Phoebe, who is the, I guess, second protagonist in this. She somehow just joins this cult based in North Korea, with an alumni who like goes to the school that she and Will currently attend. So I just felt like there wasn't a balance between Phoebe and Will. I mean, I know it's mainly Will's perspective, and I think the mystery of why Phoebe joined the cult is also maybe the point, but as a reader, I just wanted more information. By the end, I just sort of felt like, I mean, okay, I read this, but what was the point of it? But it's not without its literary strengths, so I gave it a 3 stars. The other 3-star book that I know I'm going to upset people about, because I know a lot of people love, love, love this book, and I really was expecting to give this a 5 stars, but that is The White Book by Han Kang. I have not read any of her other works. I know she's a poet and a novelist, and she's won the Man Booker International Prize before. So this, I guess this is a fiction book, maybe sort of auto-fictional with elements of prose poetry and maybe essays. This is very fragmentary. It's not traditional in any way. And in it, the main character, who is supposed to be sort of a proxy of Han Kang herself, she meditates on the death of her sister when her sister was just a child, like she was a baby. And so this book, I guess, is her way of processing that death, and she processes that death through a tracing of the color white throughout her life, and she uses that as like a prompt to then philosophize and think about existential questions, think about herself, to self-examine. So again, premise, stupendous, amazing, excellent. But for me, it was just too fragmentary. Like, we were we get one fragment and then it's just getting good and then it stops and we move on to the next one. And I mean, really, some of these are so short. And I think because they're short and the whiteness of the page takes over the text, maybe that's part of the analysis, part of what Kang was going for. But I don't know, for most of these, I just felt like it stopped before it needed to. Like there was more that could have been interrogated. I wanted maybe Kang to just do a little bit more of an analysis of white and its implications. I guess I was maybe expecting more than this book was actually offering. So maybe it's just a me thing and not a book thing. But yeah, ultimately 3 stars because there still are some really beautifully written and explosive bursts of literary genius. Moving on to a classic. Oh god, I think on Goodreads I've seen that this book gets 5 stars many times. I feel like the reviews are just 5 star, 5 star, 5 stars. I gave this 3 stars. That is The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Oh boy. First 300 pages, excellent. I was ready to give this like a 4 or a 5 stars from the very get-go. I was in awe in the beginning of how Dumas captured the protagonist Dantes, how he captured his internal struggles while in prison, how he was rationalizing his wrongful imprisonment, how he was looking at the rest of his life, how his hope was vanishing. Like all of this was done so well, and I felt for this character so much. This cannot be a spoiler at this point because it's been centuries since this book has been written, and I feel like it's a known point that he escapes the prison. When that happens, the story just takes a turn, and so does the character. I think the idea is to show how vengeance will destroy a person and how it will make them hate everyone and everything around them, and how that does form a psychological change. But I just couldn't believe it was such a sharp turn from the person that Dantes had become by the end of his prison sentence, like this hopeful, very positive, optimistic person who just goes into the world and now is like this scheming, evil guy trying to destroy the people who put him in jail. It was so sharp for me. It threw me off. And then along with his personality shift that I found quite abrupt, the story just digresses. We go off to Italy, we go off to like a cave, we go to Monte Cristo, the island. Then we get a series of different identities, different disguises and personalities that Dantes puts on as part of his scheme to get revenge on the people who put him in prison. And it just, like, we just are there for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages, and I'm just there along for the ride, but thinking, like, when are we gonna get back to the main plot? Like, are we ever going to go back to the style of the first 300 pages, or is this really it? And that was it. It just became this more of a social drama. I became more interested in all the side characters. And look, this was written in the 1840s, so prejudices and certain ideas and opinions are to be expected. But yeah, it was a little rough to read some of the stereotypes against Italians, against Spaniards. I mean, Italy is roasted from beginning to end. And also the way that one of the characters uses the Middle East as part of like his disguise, and this sort of, I don't know, it had this like sort of Orientalist vibe to it that made me a little uncomfortable. But again, written in the 1840s, so what else can you expect? But I do find it interesting that Dumas, given his, I guess, mixed heritage would still write something like that. I don't know much about Dumas or how he identified. He probably didn't identify as anything other than a Frenchman. So, yeah, but that's a different conversation. Ultimately, I still gave it 3 stars because of those brilliant first 300 pages. I really did think they were phenomenal, but yeah, this classic was just not for me. Alrighty, so coming to the last 3 books, finally almost there. I read Pachinko by Min-Jin Lee. I gave this 4 stars, but to be completely honest, I don't totally remember the specifics of this book. I read it in January, but I loved that it was a multi-generational tale. I absolutely love reading about how ideas and belief systems and trauma and all of that is passed down, maybe consciously or unconsciously, from generation to generation. And I thought Min-Jin Lee managed to do this. I mean, I think it spans like 4 generations and goes from places in South Korea, or Korea first, then turned to South Korea, to Japan, to the US and Canada, and spans several decades. So, I mean, it's a feat and it's incredibly impressive what this book is able to do. I really did feel for the characters. I think I cried at one point, but obviously it's been a while since I read this. But I really, really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars, and I really look forward to watching the Apple TV Plus adaptation. I think it's just gotten renewed for a season 2. Yeah, something to look forward to. Sorry, I can't remember much about this, but it was a very good read. Next up, I read Vladimir, or I guess Vladimir. I'm trying to pronounce it a little bit more Russian than Vladimir, but I don't think that's right either. But it's by Julia May Jonas. I gave this a 3.5 rounded up. I really wish Goodreads would just once and for all give us half-star ratings, but alas. I was made to believe that this was supposed to be a take on Nabokov's Lolita, and that it was going to be like the power dynamics but reversed, and it was about an affair and an obsession between the narrator and this much younger, sexy guy. It really wasn't that, and I don't think that having that perception out there really helps the book either, because people are expecting this sort of action-packed, sort of salacious book, when really it's kind of quiet and plotless until the last 70 pages or so. It is more about the narrator, who is a white woman in, I want to say, her late 50s. She's an English professor in the Northeast. Her husband, John, was also an English professor, but who's recently been in a scandal. Several women have come out against him for sexual assault or harassment, and he denies it. His wife also denies it, which causes another scandal within her students, her cohort, because the female students are against her now because she's, in their eyes, being anti-feminist and not supporting women who are, claiming to have been assaulted by this man in power. So that causes a rift. And so this female narrator, the wife of John, just happens to fall in love, or has an obsession with this new creative writing professor at the same college that she teaches. His name is Vladimir. But don't get too excited, like I said, because the book is more about this narrator thinking about having the affair, contemplating her feelings about it, and her feelings about her husband, and her feelings about women, and her feelings about many, many popular societal issues. There are a lot of like buzzword type topics in here. And some of her feelings and opinions are unsettling and a little bit uncomfortable to read, but I always knew that this was more of a character trait than like Julia May Jonas inserting any of her opinions into this. And I thought it was pretty brave on the author's part. The narrator is very unlikable, but I did enjoy just seeing her mentality, her rationale for things. It's a very unique position to have, and when the last 70 pages is really when the action happens, and when that happens, it's, I don't know, it's a little bit self-aware of how ridiculous the plot is. So I kind of let the absurdity of the action pass. I gave it a pass because, yeah, I think the book is a little bit self-aware about it. And yeah, generally the tone is pretty witty, smart, sharp. It has a bit of a dark sense of humor. Just know what you're getting yourself into. This doesn't feature too much dialogue. It's much more a character study and lots of paragraphs of dense prose and intellectualizing and all of that. So don't expect like a thriller or a fast-paced type of novel. But if you like that, pick this up. Okay, so I have given 5 stars to another book. When I like a book, I really like a book. I know I've given practically everything 3 stars, 2 stars, but yeah, when I love something, I love something. So this next book is now one of my favorite books of all time, alongside The Warmth of Other Suns, and it is Les Miserables by Victor Hugo, the unabridged edition, translated by Julie Rose. Let me see if I got that right. Yes, Julie Rose. A gorgeous, gorgeous translation. And while I will rave and recommend this book to everyone, I do just want to warn you that not every moment of this reading experience was enjoyable for me, and I imagine it won't be for you either. Hugo digresses many, many, many a time. He notoriously, there's the entire saga of the Battle of Waterloo, which he doesn't just summarize. He just takes 100 steps back and goes through every character, every player that had any role in that battle, and then he goes back and talks about the other battles that led up to that battle. I mean, he goes on and on and on. It's very dense. It's not like accessible historical prose like an Isabel Wilkerson. It's like dry, factual information overload. There are also chapters where he, not, I mean, more than chapters, like entire sections of the book where he talks about the etymology of French slang. There's an entire section on the history of the sewer system in Paris. So, you know, just know what you're getting into. You're going to have moments where you're going to want to quit, where, like me, you're going to want to throw this book out the window, where you just want to give up. But please, please don't. In the end, it's all worth it. A big theme of this book is in how the small details of everyday life that may seem insignificant in an isolated way actually indirectly lead to big things. And so sometimes you need an amalgamation of little things to see just how wondrous each little thing is as a whole, as a community. And Hugo emphasizes this from beginning to end. He also just makes you feel for all of the characters. If your knowledge of Les Mis was like mine, sadly, only based on the either film or stage musicals, you're in for a rude awakening. This is not in any way really, not in tone, not in character development, not in style, really much like either of those musicals. I mean, Thénardier and Javert, both of them are not the same as they were in those musicals. They're much more fleshed out. I mean, like, obviously, right? This is 1,300 pages, around 1,300 pages. So you just get more of their motivations, more of their backstories. Fantine has an entire backstory. We also know a little bit more about the father of Cosette in this novel. We learn more about the priest that Jean Valjean in the beginning of the story runs into and like steals the candles, the candelabra, and all of that. So we just know so much about everyone in here. It's this beautiful tapestry of a community, of a country, of a city, of this very important time period in French history. It's just so worthwhile, so inspirational. By the end, like I wanted to cry. The last section is about Jean Valjean, and specifically like the last few pages of his death almost broke me. I mean, this book really emphasizes never giving up, really pushing through the difficult times, much like the reading experience of, reading Les Mis. So yeah, I really, really encourage you to read this. I gave it 5 stars. If there are 2 books that I want everyone to just pick up after this, it would be this one and The Warmth of Other Suns. Really, you will be changed and a better person after reading them, in my humble opinion. I know I was. And just to give you a little taste of just how beautiful the writing can be, this is from page 1018 in my edition. It says, "The book that the reader has before his eyes at this moment is, from one end to the other, as a whole and in its every detail, whatever its irregularities, its exceptions or shortcomings, a step from bad to good, from the unjust to the just, from the false to the true, from night to day, from appetite to awareness, from rottenness to life, from bestiality to duty, from hell to heaven, from nothingness to God. Starting point, matter. End point, the soul. A hydra in the beginning, an angel at the end." I'm also generally just amazed at how one person, being in this case Victor Hugo, could have this wealth of knowledge at his disposal. He can eloquently write about religion as he can politics, as he can war, as he can romance, like amazing. Okay, so that is it. That is the end of this video. So many books that I had to talk about. I hope you made it through to this point. If you have, thank you. You're amazing. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe. Stay tuned for that, video on my special reading project. And yeah, I will see you next time and continue having a great day. Yeah, see you next time. Bye.